Hi everyone, we are back for our second scenario review, and that means we're taking a look at the Midnight Masks. And I'm here as always with Superfeng99, and we will get started talking about what's in the Midnight Masks and a little bit about how the scenario goes before going into our ratings. Now, if you haven't played the scenario before, we will be talking about spoilers, so go play the scenario if you haven't played this one. All right, let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to go over to Tabletop Simulator, and Superfeng, you're going to go ahead and give us a little bit of the overview of how the scenario usually goes.
Yeah, excited for this one. This is always a very fun scenario. So, gist of the scenario, you're going around Arkham, getting clues, and you're uncovering the cultists that that Lita warned you about in the previous scenario. So, the main mechanic of this is going to be this action on the act card, which you can take an action to spend 2 clues per investigator's group and draw the top card of the cultist deck. And the cultist deck is randomly set up during setup, and they will be spawning in a location that their spawn keyword designates, so somewhere on this map. And you have to go put them in the victory display, either by defeating them, of course, or by the text on their card. So already this has a lot of replayability, because where these people, or in fact whom of these cultists is going to show up is going to be basically different every time, and the order in which they show up is different. You also have a couple randomized locations, notably downtown and south side. There's 2 versions of each of them. They both do slightly different things.
I'm not even sure I remember what they actually do. Let's take a look.
I know.
So south side, the difference, Shroud is a little different. And then the action, draw 3 cards on the Historical Society versus, finding an ally asset. I don't even remember that one. Okay, cool.
I know. This one, I feel like I've never seen this one before, if I'll be honest.
It makes sense, right? This is a Ma's boarding house. Okay.
Yeah. And then on downtown, this one's a big one, because one of them has victory and one of them doesn't.
Oh, why did they do that?
I know.
Okay.
Also, one of them has more clues, which could affect how easy it is you can get all the cultists.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But otherwise, all the locations, except for with one exception, actually do something good, which is really, really cool. Your house, oh, by the way, your house only shows up if you didn't burn your house down, which is another great carryover from last scenario.
Mm-hmm.
And everything else is like, do things, get clues, or find things in your deck, or heal damage, or horror. The only bad one is graveyard, really. But that makes sense because it's a graveyard. East Town's my personal favorite, reducing ally cards you play here by 2.
Yeah, I remember this one because this location shows up in future campaigns too.
Yeah. Yeah, but so ultimately you're going around getting clues, and then you have to spawn the cultists and deal with them. And that's basically the whole scenario, with one exception, because there's a possibility that you can get 6 cultists. And this by far is probably the coolest thing about the scenario, which is on the agenda flip is the 6 cultists, which I don't know about you, but when we first played this scenario myself in my group, this was awesome. This is like the defining moment of like, holy shit, this is what Arkham can do by putting an enemy on the back of this card.
Yeah, you're expecting there to be some instructions about, some story, and it's not. It's just, hello, here's the guy.
Yeah. And it also, because I think it does hint at some point, I think, that there can get the act. That's right. The act says, if all 6 are in the victor's play, note not all of them are in the cultist deck. Which is like, where's the last one? And you're like, oh, there he is.
Yeah. When I first played this, I know I kind of was confused about that unique name there. We'll talk about the other cultists in the scenario in a second, but yeah, unique means the stars in front of their name.
Yeah, and I do think that one thing they could have done is like in parentheses put the little star next to unique, and that would have helped.
Yeah, I got confused with that in a future campaign too in my first playthrough, but yeah, it makes sense now that these are the 6. There's no others.
Yep. That's basically it. You have to find the cultists, put them in victory display. Mm-hmm. It's a fairly simple scenario in the sense that the objectives are very clear, but it varies wildly between playthroughs, I find.
Yeah, I'm just going to move one of the random locations out so we can look at the map itself. Because it's kind of even if your house isn't here, it's kind of a wild map because there's connections all around except for Graveyard is on its own. You have to go in and out from the central location, which we'll talk about again in a second. But there isn't an obvious which direction should you go. I don't think this scenario is solved, and it's partly the connections on the map, and it's also definitely the order in which the cultists come out really changes the where you're going to be moving towards.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of my favorite parts about this is like early on in the design of the game, as seen through the scenario, they thought about what are the different archetypes in the game and the other ways to parlay, well, not Wolfman but the other ones kind of hint at what investigators might be good at doing other than just fighting. So Herman Collins, choose and discard four cards. That's basically, big hand. Spend 2 clues. Well, everyone should be able to do that, but the seekers who want to get clues, that's another way to deal with Peter Warren. Spend 5 resources, kind of a precursor to big money. And then evasion.
Yep.
So everyone should have something that they can help with or feel like, oh yeah, I can do this. And that's pretty good design.
Yep. Do you want to talk about the scenario reference card?
Sure. I think this goes in tandem with the encounter deck we'll talk about in a second. So
Absolutely.
there's just the 3 different symbol tokens in this one. So there's the skulls -X, which is the highest number of doom on a cultist in play. This is often going to be 0, sometimes 1, and sometimes 2, but usually never going to get any more than that unless things are going very poorly.
I'll tell you about my blind playthrough scenario, but we lost because the skull was 4 at one point.
What happened? Was there mysterious chanting or something show up?
Yeah, it was like a double mysterious chanting off of drawing stuff. Well, why don't I talk about my blind playthrough, because it's an amazing story.
Sure.
Before the agenda flipped, we had gotten 1 cultist already, and then when the agenda flipped, this guy came out, and he's pretty beefy. We were playing with 4 players, so that means that he has 12 health.
Yep.
Which isn't like the number in my head. I'm like, that's not so bad. We did end up losing to this guy because in the subsequent 4 turns, 4 doom was placed on the masked hunter, and we were unable to kill him because of some auto fails that we drew. And so we actually doomed out because of the masked hunter and the mysterious chanting putting too much doom on him. We ended up only getting 2 of them, but we realized that if we were actually able to land that attack on the masked hunter, we probably would have gotten at least 5 of them total.
Wow.
So it definitely was very interesting leading into the last scenario, which we will talk about later, of course.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have a memorable experience that's kind of like that. It wasn't my blind playthrough, but it was the first time for a couple people I was playing with, and something similar happened. I was playing with a more or less full card pool, not to 2023 standards, but
Yeah.
I think I was playing Leo Anderson with survival knives, and I can't remember exactly how we got a bunch of doom on this guy. It probably was something similar, but I intended on killing him with 1 or 2 survival knives, and neither one could land the shot during the enemy phase.
No.
So we got very close, but yeah, I think we doomed out in the second agenda. Let's talk about like how many agendas I think there are, right? Is it just these 2, right?
It's true, yeah.
Okay, so that gives you 6 plus 8-ish rounds, plus whatever I guess you start with.
Assuming no acolytes or Wizard of the Orders or other doom in play causes it to go early.
Yeah, so it's feels like it's not as long as you might hope for, which is another hallmark I think of these type of push your luck scenarios where how many are you expected to get? Well, 6 maybe, but really the game doesn't expect you to do that. I think only at with everything going right, everything spawning in the right location where you are, or with a lot of XP in your decks, can you really pull this off. I've done it before, but it's rare. Like I think usually you feel like 3 is standard, like you're doing okay, and you should be able to get 4 or 5 if you know what you're doing.
Yeah, I think that the beauty of this scenario is that it very much is the players who decide how well they've done, rather than the scenario deciding that. The players get to decide, okay, we've gotten 2 or 3 cultists this time, that's totally fine. And in later playthroughs, they're gonna be like, okay, well, I want to try for more of them and more of them, and that kind of push your luck aspect with this. That the scenario reacts to the degree of success that you have made in this scenario is really, really cool and really interesting.
Yeah, and this scenario is, I think, a template for all future scenarios that are that are like this. I think Threads of Fate uses a lot of the same cards, kind of has a similar idea that's in the Forgotten Age. Even Guardians of the Abyss, which is a standalone, the first scenario of it has a similar mechanic of spawning random. They're not cultists, but maybe they are Brotherhood, something or other. Anyway,
Something like that.
yeah, the similar idea where you try to do as well as you can, but every playthrough is going to be a little different based on how things just come out of the deck. So that's fun. All right, encounter deck time.
Let's do it.
So first off, this guy, the Ghoul Priest, might be there if you didn't manage to kill him in the first scenario.
I honestly love this.
That's cool, right?
It's really cool. It's really tough, but it is just a really key piece of flavor of, hey, you didn't kill him last scenario. He's back.
And he spawns at your house.
Correct.
Yeah, just throwing this guy in the encounter deck it's wild, but All right, what else do we have?
We'll start with Locked Door, I think.
Sure.
So yeah, Locked Door, the bane of all seekers everywhere, I guess. Locked Door is a very interesting card. I think that with Locked Door, well, first of all, attached location cannot be investigated. As an action, test fist 4 or foot 4 to break it down and discard it. This card is really cool because it basically, to a certain extent, signifies that the seeker, or like, it's a way to stop the seeker's progress of getting clues without popping an enemy there, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. This is most likely going to be dealt with by your fighter, or, for example, like skids who might be evading. So basically, that's a way to hinder progress without shoving an enemy in their face, which I think is a really cool concept.
Yeah, I agree. And those two, having a choice of two stats to test against, I think is really good. I mean, it makes sense flavorfully with the Locked Door itself, but that also means that you're not just locked into having one solution to the problem. And of course, the other solution is don't investigate. Use something like Drawn to the Flame instead.
Yep. Or Working Hunch, or Roland's ability.
Mm-hmm. All right.
Shall we move on?
Sure.
Okay. Cultist, the quintessential Doom card. So yeah, I love this set because it effectively is an archetype in its own, and it spawns so many other encounter sets about Doom related enemies. When they enter play, you put Doom on them. This guy accumulates Doom, and this one either fetches more of them or places more Doom. To me, this is a very interesting way to do Doom in a scenario because it puts the pressure on the players to deal with the Doom that's in play, as opposed to just having the Doom be applied to them. But yeah, what are your thoughts on this?
I think it's a great set. It shows up in almost every campaign, and I mean, the Acolyte being only 1 health means that in the core set, there's a couple ways to deal with it. Mostly it's a fight check, right? You have to be able to pass a 3 combat test.
Yeah.
But there's a couple of things you could do. Beat cop level 2, even beat cop level 0. Agnes's ability just deals with it right out. But especially because it has 1 Doom on it, it says, come look at me right now. I need your attention, and no matter what else is going on, you have to kind of count out the number of turns you have left until he's going to be a problem. But especially in higher player counts, that might not be so easy to do because of mysterious chanting that accelerates the Doom. So Acolyte's amazing. I think it's a great card, and it is, again, if you don't have a traditional fighter on your team, you kind of have to figure out how to deal with this problem in every single campaign, because the Doom can't be ignored. You can't just evade this guy and have his Doom go away. That just doesn't happen. So you have to resort to some weird things if you're playing. I was doing a Forgotten Age run with Jacqueline Fine and Wendy, and you end up doing strange things like playing a coup de grace, or hoping that you pass on Jacqueline with Jacqueline's ability on a fight check. Right. But you can't ignore it, right?
Yep.
But sometimes you can. If you get lucky and draw one of these guys, and it is the witching hour, right? So the Doom won't really contribute to the agenda advancing, then you're good.
Yep.
The Wizard of the Order, on the other hand, has to be killed.
Yeah. Wizard of the Order is a really cool card because it accumulates Doom, meaning that his he basically gets worse and worse the more time goes on, especially with mysterious chantings as well.
Mhm.
So he basically needs to be dealt with, and he's like fairly tough. 4 fight is not nothing with retaliate.
Yeah. Good thing he's got only 2 health, so you can use other events to deal with him. So
Yep.
it's not impossible, but once he shows up, I mean, I actually like sometimes dragging him out with mysterious chanting, just so
That's true.
I'm getting him on my own terms. But yeah, on a reshuffle or something, you might have to deal with him more than once. But iconic set, right? It's not just for this set. I think it's maybe even a little beefier because the cultists are not just this set, but rather the cultists you're interviewing or the masked hunter. So Doom can be placed on them too. But I think it makes it a little easier to deal with since you can just parlay with them and make the Doom go away that way too.
Unless the Doom goes on the masked hunter and you can't kill him, which is what happened to me, as I said. That was tough.
Okay, let's go ahead and talk about the Night encounter set.
Yeah, the Nikon's super beefy. That they have that 4 health. I think that they're the first hunters that we'll see. Well, except for the Ghoul Priest, of course. But they are the first times where it's viable to evade them. They only have that 1 evade. Of course, they do have that weird ability about doubling the negative modifiers, but they have such high health that evading them might be a solution. It just means that they're going to be chasing you across the entire map the whole time, which maybe you'll have to do that.
Yeah, it's definitely possible. I've done it in this scenario or the other ones that they show up in. I think all of these encounter sets, right? They show up in future scenarios in the campaign, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. The Nikons, there's also a version, I think now in Scarlet Keys, where they double the combat negative modifier, which is very interesting. And then, oh, you know what? I just noticed something. They're also the first monsters that we're seeing outside of the Gathering. So Lita Chandler's ability will work on them.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Which I think is actually pretty huge because you can do a 4 damage attack with Lita if you like throw a vicious blow into a 45 automatic attack, for example. So that's a way that Lita can help you in this scenario as well.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, the 4 health is otherwise pretty tough because that's going to be, 2 charges from your Shriveling, maybe two bullets from your 45 automatic. It's going to take a lot out of you, especially if you've been using all of those weapons to kill the cultists. So it's another good reason to parlay them and not try to kill them all. But yeah, there's 2 of these guys, and they keep showing up. And there's one other thing in this set, which is On Wings of Darkness, which is a tough agility test, right? This is not one that most investigators are going to pass. So
yeah, pretty much everyone is expected to fail on Wings of Darkness. It's a very interesting card because a lot of times, it's tough moving back to the central location. You don't want to be there. Sometimes you do want to be there. Sometimes it's free movement, which is always very serendipitous when that does happen. It also has very good flavor because you disengage from each non-Nikon enemy, meaning that if you're fighting a cultist or you're fighting an acolyte, they stay behind, but the Nikon follows you because it's like, they're grabbing you.
Has that ever happened to you? I feel like every time I've drawn this, the Nikons aren't on the board.
Yeah, ideally, the Nikons either are not engaged with you because you evaded them last turn or you killed them. But it has happened to me once, and it was very flavorful.
That's cool.
Yeah. Weird thing about this card, does not have a trait for some reason.
Yeah, and it also has that central location text on it, so every scenario that this set shows up in has to have a central location.
Yep.
All right, next set is the Chilling Cold set, which we've already talked about. Crypt Chill, Obscuring Fog, just a little bit more on the clue pressure for investigation for Obscuring Fog, and Crypt Chill, it's scary. Okay, enough said.
It is very scary.
All right, so these 5 cards down here all probably should have been in their own encounter set. And that's because they show up in a lot of other scenarios down the line, and they all say something like, go search for these 5 cards from the Midnight Masks, and then don't take anything else.
It's always funny when you're like reading the thing and it's like, oh, Midnight. Oh, right. Of course. It's just finding these cards again. Which is, slightly unfortunate, but it just means that these cards are very, very cool. And I think are very applicable in a lot of places.
And very important. So Hunting Shadow, the first one, Peril. So it's our first Peril card. And gives you this choice of spending a clue or taking 2 damage, and you have to do something that changes the game state. So if you have no clues, you have to take the 2 damage.
Yep. It's a very interesting card, I think, because it Hunting Shadow, by definition, because you can spend clues, has to be in scenarios where you like don't necessarily need all of the clues to be able to complete the scenario. For example, in the Gathering, the previous scenario, you need all of those, the 2 per investigator clues at the very beginning. And if you just spend a clue there, then you just soft lock yourself. But so they can basically design a card like this where the question is always, how many clues are we going to get? And do we think that I can spare clues to not take the damage? Because for Seekers like Daisy or like Agnes, who only have 6 health, 5 health, that 2 damage is not nothing. It's testless 2 damage, which is really tough. So you can go into very interesting decisions on whether or not you have to spend a clue or not, which I think is the really cool part about Peril, where you have to make the decision for yourself, because the clues are the group's progress. And so you have to make the decision of, do we kind of hinder the group's progress so that I don't die, or do I just take the hit?
Mm-hmm. And there's 3 of them in the deck, so you cannot ignore this card. And yeah. I like how there's some amount of play here for, if a fighter gets it, they're less likely to have clues.
Yeah.
And they're also more likely to be able to take the damage. So there's some, play where, okay, Daisy probably has the clue to spend and can avoid the damage, but you're also encouraged in the scenario to spend all of your clues rather quickly to spawn the cultists and to avoid the next card that we're going to see. So it's a little tricky.
Yeah.
All right, False Lead. This is our other encounter card with no trait.
Correct, which is still weird to me.
This one gains Surge quite a bit, right? So if you have no clues, it's again kind of like the last one, where if you don't have clues, you're going to have to take the damage. And this one, it's just you get a different encounter card. And this whole encounter deck is pretty small. There's only, I think, 20-ish cards in it. So you're going to get a lot of these cards shuffled back in once the encounter deck reshuffles, especially on 4 players. And a card that gains Surge is going to make that happen, I think, more often than not.
Yeah, this is a very interesting card. I have heard the term or spoken the term False Lead, no clues gains Surge, probably like hundreds of times now. For some reason, it very rarely hits for me. And but with that said, when it does hit for me, it can be almost catastrophic sometimes. Either because I'm not running a high book investigator that gets the False Lead, or like when you do draw it, you just draw a -4 and you're like, well, I lost 3 actions there. It's a very interesting card because I think that the point of it is to encourage you to spend your clues, to, spend them as frequently as possible. But I don't think going in blind, a lot of people get that. And so going in blind, a lot of players hoard the clues and then realize, oh, right, we need to spend the actions to actually get these cultists out. And False Lead can be utterly catastrophic at those points, I feel. There have been multiple points when I've been playing that this has dropped 4 clues on the ground because, say, our Skids with his he only has 3 book.
Mm-hmm.
Our Skids has been getting clues with lockpicks, but he couldn't pass the book test. It's very interesting.
Again, it's another tough test. We have 4 agility on Wings of Darkness. We've got 4 willpower on Crypt Chill, and then 4 intellect. So these are
and 4 on the locked doors too.
4 on the locked doors. Yeah, these are all medium to difficult tests, I think, especially for scenario number 2. But it's not that bad. Usually you're going to drop 1 or 2, and then you just have to pick them up again. I think if you're trying to get all 6 cultists, it's bad, right? It's going to put you back quite a bit, but otherwise, hopefully you can pick them up again. I think the most annoying part about this card is when you end up dropping them on a victory point location that you just cleared off.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, to be fair, with False Lead, it shows up in these kinds of scenarios, similar to Hunting Shadow, where the degree of success is not can we get all the clues, but it's how many clues can we get.
Mm-hmm.
And so it doesn't stop progress in that binary state where it's like, we have all the clues, now we don't. Now it's like, oh, it hindered our progress in the sense that we dropped some of the clues that we need, but maybe we don't actually need them all. And so in that sense, it is tailored to this kind of scenario design, which is very good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And just sort of as another point, you're placing the clues on your location. You can get them again. Whereas Hunting Shadow, you're spending the clue. It's removed from the game, basically.
Yep.
So something to think about. Okay, we have done everything with the encounter sets, I think. Anything else we want to talk about here? We'll make some comments on the return to at the very end. So let's just jump into our ratings then.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Okay, here we are. We'll talk about our first criteria, replayability. Again, we've talked about sort of how we are thinking about these scenario reviews in a previous video. If you haven't seen the intro to these reviews, go ahead and watch that one. All right, so we've touched on this already. The replayability is excellent. I think, it's not going to be extremely different every playthrough because it's still the same scenario. But as far as how Arkham does it, I think this is basically almost as good as it gets.
I think that there are some scenarios that I do find more quote unquote replayable than this, but this one definitely sets the bar for replayability. So if it's okay if I give my rating, I would probably put it at a 4.5 for replayability.
4.5 is here, right?
Yeah, we got that squared away. I love it.
Yep.
The order in which the cultists come out is going to be different every time. There's some random locations going on. You can pretty much choose where you're going in the scenario, and whether or not you burned your house down, for example, changes the locations and whether or not the ghoul priest is there potentially. And I think that the scenario lends itself to a lot of high replayability because the encounter deck very much influences the play-by-play of the scenario. Whether or not you get a locked door somewhere, you're like, okay, let's wait to do those clues later on. Let's go over here. Or cultists spawning in different locations, and you're like, oh, I'm led this way because I need to deal with that cultist. Or hunting nightgons shoving you back into the central location and stuff like that. So there's a lot of different things that are pulling you all in all directions, which lead to very interesting and different ways that the scenario turns out.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of people often say that the way you play Arkham is you go to a location, you clear off the clues, you move on, you never go back. But that's not always true, and this scenario really puts pressure on making those interesting decisions, which I guess is, I don't know, maybe that was a different criteria, but I agree, right? I'm going to put it right at the top there, 4.5. I mean, there could be more different locations. There could be different cultists, which they do in the return too. So let's just leave it at that. Anything else to say about the replayability?
I think that's good.
All right, let's go to the next one, which is fairness. And this is kind of, as a reminder, can everyone participate, right? Is there something that everyone can do? And can you do something about those random elements that we just talked about?
Yeah. So, as I said before, the order of the cultists is random, but when they do come out, it's up to the players to move towards them and deal with them. Same with the cultists on where they're going out. You do get to choose what empty locations they do spawn at. And so there's some agency there on where you can go to deal with them. But also, the spawning the cultist takes an action. It's not like it happens every 2 rounds or something. It's up to the players to decide, okay, we're ready now. We're going to spawn some cultists, decide where we're going, and go from there. So in my opinion, this scenario is very, very fair. I'll put it at a 4. It really provides the right amount of pressure because it adds doom in ways that you can remove it. And it makes it so that the success of the scenario is dictated by how much the players think the success of the scenario is, rather than the scenario saying you lost or you won.
Yeah, and I don't think that, so kind of regarding the last question, does it apply appropriate pressure? So basically this is all about the doom mechanic. And I think very rarely does the issue that you came up with mean that you feel like you just got screwed, right?
Yeah.
It'll happen where doom accumulates on a cultist or a cultist that's very hard to kill, but you have a chance, right? Importantly, Ancient Evils is not in this set. So you can't just get doom on a cultist and then Ancient Evils and you felt like you lost, 3 or 4 rounds through no fault of your own. So, good job. This is a good introduction to the doom mechanic. I think I'm going to put it at 4.5.
Nice.
All right, let's go to the next one, which is balance. And I've sort of touched on this already. Can you complete the scenario with a reasonable team of investigators? And yes, I mean, this is maybe the best version of that, where everyone should have something that they can do. You're fighting enemies, you can evade Ruth Turner, I think it is, in the hospital.
Yep.
You can try to evade the hunting Nikons. It'll be a little tough, but it's not impossible. But I mean, it's classic Arkham, right? Whatever, if you're doing something,
Arkham.
if you're doing something that doesn't match this scenario, then it's probably not going to work out in any campaign. And this is one of the reasons why a lot of people use this as a deck testing scenario.
Yeah. The one thing I will say on balance is you're right. It does allow for lots of different kinds of play styles. I will say one particular play style, in my opinion, is a little bit leaned on more in this scenario, and that's movement. If you have an investigator or a pack of cards that can allow you to move very quickly or anywhere across the map, you can find yourself very much advantaged in the scenario because of the fact that acolytes spawn at different locations, and so you can go where you need to go. Because the cultists, you don't know exactly where they're going to go when you draw them, that you can go where you need to go. A lot of this scenario is going to be moving around. It's one of the first sort of big map scenarios. Mm-hmm. And so if you have an investigator with lots of movement tools, that can be really good. Honestly, it's not that much more advantage, but it is there. I'm going to put a balance at also a 4, just because of the movement thing. But otherwise, yeah, it allows, like, basically, if you want to test your deck, as you were talking about, this is a scenario for it, because it is, get clues, deal with enemies in most ways that you can think of.
I'm going to put it at 5. I think of this scenario a lot when I think about how did they design the game in general, and they probably thought about archetypes that didn't exist yet. I don't think big money was really a thing outside of, you can get a lot of resources to use Skid's ability a few times, and yet there's ways to get money, there's ways to do something with the money, and those seeds, I can see, having experienced the game much more now, I can see those seeds are already planted in this scenario.
Yeah.
All right. Last one is the experience. Does the scenario represent a new and interesting gameplay loop? Again, this is the first time you see a lot of things, so, I mean, by definition, kind of.
Yeah.
I would say, it's a good, fun gameplay loop. Moving around, spending clues, interviewing the cultists, or killing them.
Yeah. I'm just gonna go straight to a 5 right now.
Mm-hmm.
It as you said, it's new. It's like the Gathering before, but it also is just so strong of a scenario. The Mass Hunter coming up on the agenda flip. Each of the cultists, you get, where they come out and what they do is very thematic to who they represent. I still love the Your House and the Ghoul Priest stuff showing up. It's so thematic on the previous choice that you made in the previous scenario. I think that all of the locations are really cool. They all kind of lean into that, like, oh, you're going around Arkham and you're just like, doing stuff, and you can find books here, or you can, go to Ma's boarding house and find an ally. You go to the graveyard and you might have to leave or take horror. There's a lot of really neat details in the locations themselves that just add a lot of atmosphere. I think that for this scenario, like, the aesthetic of a scenario is so strong in this scenario. That's why it's probably, it's why it's a lot of people's favorite.
And it's one of the few, I think, that really just goes from the previous scenario. There's not much that happened in between, so you really feel part of the story, going from just your house, walking around the rooms of your house, to exploring Arkham itself. So that's awesome, right?
Yep.
One thing that is a little sad, I think, let's just go over to TTS. I'm giving it a 5. Let's go over to TTS for a second. If you do interview all 6 of the cultists, I believe there is a special thing to read that adds to the experience.
Yes.
And if you don't get all 6, you'll maybe not have read this before, but I kind of wish that this was in the campaign guide in some way.
Yeah, I can see that. I do think that I can see it both ways. One, it would be nice to read this because it's really cool flavor on the, like, if this was in a modern scenario, like in the latest campaign, it would probably be like, read each of these sections for each cultist of the victory display in the campaign log, right? Yeah. Obviously, it's a little complex to read in the first scenario, in the first campaign in particular. That being said, I kind of like this, where it's almost like a reward for getting all 6. You get to learn a little bit more about each of them, and you get to dig deeper into their, cultist shenanigans and what they've been doing. So it's both. I can see both ways.
Yeah, you're right. I just remember being pleasantly surprised when reading it for the first time, but also feeling like I wish I knew a little bit about like what these cultists were up to beforehand.
That's true.
All right, so I think that is it for this scenario, other than we'll now talk about the Return to a little bit.
Yeah. So in the Return to, I don't actually have the cards out, but effectively there are duplicate locations of East Town, North Side, I think actually all of them, right? Miskatonic and St. Mary's, I think also.
Hang on, let's just get the cards.
Yep.
Okay, we have the Return to out here.
Yes, so there's the East Town one, there is North Side, specifically that one, Miskatonic, and then South Side. No, we already did South Side.
Those, yeah. There's another Rivertown, yeah.
There's another new Rivertown, yeah. So yeah, duplicate locations for those, which is really cool. I really like the what is this one? Not that one. That one's a little sad. It removes the victory. So does this one, actually. It's possible to get new victory in locations, I think, now. Except for Graveyard.
East Town has victory now.
Correct. So that's the way to get it back. Anyway, it just adds some variance because, adds some replayability. For me, though, the really cool part is adding the other cultists. Where are the other cultists? Are they in here?
Well, there's another one of these cultists. Where's the other cultist?
That's true. Yeah, there's this guy, Naragath.
Yeah.
I don't know where the other cultist went.
Maybe if we hit setup. All right, hang on. Okay, we found them. So
yeah,
there's the normal bunch.
And then there's these guys.
And there's 3 extra ones. And this adds a little bit more variance to not just you have to prepare for those 5. Rather, you might get 1, 2, or 3 of these guys. So Almahill, pretty cool. You have to draw encounter cards. Again, kind of going back to the archetypes. This is kind of a neat one for mystics to deal with.
Yep. Counter card manipulation.
Another way to deal with fighting, I suppose, with Billy Cooper. Look at the 5.
You basically have to kill a Night Gaunt, or I think the new cultists are also monsters. This guy. The big guy is. Oh, yeah, those guys are too. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, there's a way to get it. There's a way to get him without actually having to kill him, which is really cool for the fighters.
And then Jeremiah, another thing for mystics to deal with, which is kind of a fun thing to do. Maybe do that one last if you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So those guys can show up, and then you've got a 50-50 shot of Naragath.
Yeah.
And he's a monster, unlike Masked Hunter.
Correct. He has +3 health per investigator, which is more, and then cannot parlay with the cultist enemies. So you can still spend clues, but it's just a little tougher to deal with them in their weird ways.
Cool art too.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is one where we can talk about the cultists in a second, but like if you have Lita Chantler, this is way easier to deal with.
Yep.
If you don't, then it's going to be a little tougher, but that makes sense with the scenario.
Yep.
You don't get to use these other cultists, other versions of the cultists outside of Return to Night of the Zealot, and they are really tough. They do more damage or horror. They get more doom. They have more health. They're just strict upgrades. And, I, you know, I think this is a great scenario as it is. It may not need, this guy spawns way far away instead of just any empty location. So it may not need these extra tune-ups, but I would maybe even just add the 3 other cultists to interview without worrying about the other encounter sets here.
Yeah.
But some good changes, preview of what they do ahead to make it a little bit more replayable.
Yeah. Replayability is huge for this return too, for sure.
Anything else you want to talk about for the Midnight Mask in general?
I think that's it.
All right, great. So it's a great scenario. It really sets a gold standard for me. And if you haven't played it recently, go back and play it. Just test a few decks that you're thinking about and see what happens. Every time it's a little different. And it has a good story. I've got a good story. You've got a good story. I am sure that you, the viewer, also have a good story. So we'll see you in the next one. We'll finish up Night of the Zealot by talking about the Devour Below. One that I have not replayed as much as this scenario.